The rain hammered Greystone Pier, chasing workers indoors and drowning the night in cold, silver noise. But in the center of the ferry terminal, something impossible unfolded. A little girl sat alone on the wet concrete, drawing on a wrinkled tourist map with pieces of chalk far too bright for such a stormy night. And then 6 police German shepherds broke formation and surrounded her, not barking, not threatening, but staring, trembling, reacting as if a silent alarm had gone off inside their bones. The officers froze. Trained canines never behaved like this. Never. When Calder Wynne stepped closer and saw what the girl had drawn, his breath stopped in his chest. The symbols weren't childish at all. They were tactical markings, and every single dog was fixated on the same curved blue line. At first, the crowd thought the girl was playing, but the police dogs knew better. They recognized the map of a place no child should have ever seen. A cold gray rain drifted in from the harbor, soft enough to blur the cranes and freighters, but steady enough to sting the skin. It was the kind of weather Greystone Pier knew well, wet, metallic, and always carrying the scent of old iron and salt. Sergeant Calder Wynne walked the eastern platform with the quiet weight of someone who had long stopped expecting good news. He was 39, tall and sharply built, his shoulders squared from years of hauling equipment and responsibility. His face bore the edges of a man carved from stubborn resolve. Angular jaw, faint crow's feet, a day's worth of stubble he never quite remembered to shave. His hair was dark brown, kept short, though a streak of gray cut across the right side like a scar of time. Calder spoke little with his team, not out of coldness, but because silence had become a habit since Bracken disappeared. He had once been easygoing, the kind of officer who joked with rookies and bought coffee for the late shifts. But losing a partner, especially a 4-legged one, had hollowed something in him, leaving his patience thin and his nights long. Beside him padded the remaining canines, 6 German shepherds trained for maritime patrol. Each was in peak physical form, lean shoulders, powerful hind legs, and thick waterproof coats in shades of sable, black, and tan. The youngest among them, Rook, a 2-year-old with sharp golden eyes and a narrower snout than the others, kept closer to Calder than usual. Rook had always been sensitive, almost too perceptive for a young working dog, and since Bracken vanished he had developed a habit of watching Calder with quiet concern, as if aware of the guilt the sergeant refused to verbalize. 3 weeks. Calder had replayed the collapse of the warehouse on Pier 5 more times than he could count. The falling beams, the roar of ruptured steel, the dust swallowing everything. He had called Bracken again and again through the comms until the static felt like nails in his teeth. No body, no trace, just claw marks and fragments of a collar found in the rubble. A dog couldn't survive that long. Logic insisted it. Yet something quieter inside him refused to let go. The rain intensified, pattering against the steel containers, stacked like abandoned monoliths. Evening ferries moaned their horns through the fog, passengers clutching umbrellas while harbor workers in neon jackets hauled crates under the dim yellow floodlights. Calder adjusted the collar of his duty jacket, leather darkened by rain, and scanned the pier with the habitual caution of someone who knew danger didn't always announce itself. Behind him trotted Officer Lorne Brecker, a stocky man in his late 40s with a weather-worn face and sandy blonde hair grown long enough to curl at the tips. Lorne had a gentle temperament despite his intimidating frame, broad chest, thick arms, the gait of a retired boxer who still remembered how to move lightly. He'd been Calder's closest colleague. For years, ever since a fuel line explosion on the North Pier burned half his left forearm. Lorne joked that surviving it made him slightly fireproof, but Calder knew trauma had made the man fiercely protective of every life he was responsible for, man or dog. "Rook's tail's stiff," Lorne called over the rain. "He's sensing something." Calder followed the dog's tense gaze. Rook had halted mid-stride, ears pricked forward, body angled slightly to the right. One by one, the other shepherds mirrored him as if an invisible ripple passed through the air. Their handlers tightened their grips instinctively. "What is it, boy?" Calder murmured. Rook didn't bark. None of them did. Instead, all 6 dogs began to pull, not toward danger, but toward the central plaza in front of the ferry waiting hall, where rainwater pooled into thin, mirrored sheets. Calder felt his pulse quicken. Canines rarely moved in unison unless something triggered them deeply. They rounded the corner, and the sight waiting there stopped even the seasoned handlers. A small girl sat on the wet concrete beneath the overhang of the passenger lounge. Ivy Merritt, though Calder did not yet know her name. She looked about 8 years old, slight in frame, with a halo of damp chestnut curls falling around her cheeks. Her yellow raincoat was several sizes too big, sleeves swallowed her hands, and her rubber boots were scuffed as though they had belonged to an older sibling. Ivy's skin was a warm olive tone, her eyes large and hazel, carrying that distant, inward-drawn look children sometimes have when they live more in their imagination than the world around them. She was hunched over a tourist map, the paper soaked enough to wrinkle but not yet ruined. In her small hands she held pieces of bright construction chalk, likely borrowed from dock workers who marked crates with them. She drew, slowly, with utter focus, and the dogs, every single one, formed a gradual semicircle around her, lowering their heads, eyes fixed on the swirling shapes Ivy traced across the map. "Hey," Lorne whispered, stunned. "They're not guarding, they're studying." Calder stepped forward carefully, not wanting to startle the child or the dogs. His boots splashed softly in the puddles as he approached. Something about the stillness prickled the back of his neck. Ivy didn't notice the officers at first. She was too absorbed, her small brow furrowed, lips pressed together in concentration, and though the rain blew around her, she sat beneath the slight shelter of the overhang like a solitary figure in a scene no one else was meant to disturb. Finally, Calder crouched, voice even. "Hey there, what are you drawing?" Ivy looked up, and those hazel eyes held a strange mix of fear, focus, and something older than her age. Her curls clung to her cheeks, and rainwater glistened on her lashes. "I'm just drawing what he showed me," she whispered. Calder's chest tightened, though he couldn't explain why. "Who showed you?" Ivy's fingers tightened around the chalk, knuckles pale. She swallowed, a single tear mixed with the rain on her cheek. "The hurt dog," she said. "The one from last night." The canines all shifted at once, as if the words themselves had weight. Calder's heart sank with a cold certainty he had been avoiding for weeks. Somewhere deep inside, hope flickered, and fear followed right after. Rain continued to trickle from the overhang of the ferry terminal, tapping softly against metal benches and the glass walls behind Ivy, as Sergeant Calder Wynne steadied himself beside the drenched tourist map. The air smelled of salt, oil, rust, and the faint sweetness of chalk from the girl's hands. Around them, the semicircle of German shepherds remained frozen in a tension so focused it felt almost ritualistic. 6 pairs of amber, brown, and gold eyes locked onto the swirling symbols Ivy Merritt had drawn. Calder had spent nearly 2 decades working with K9 units, and he had never seen trained dogs behave this way. Not during bomb alerts, not during search and rescue drills, and certainly not in response to a child's drawing. Ivy hugged the sleeves of her oversized yellow raincoat close to her chest, shrinking beneath its weight like a sparrow caught in a storm. Her curls were plastered wet against her temples, her cheeks pink from cold, but her eyes carried a fragile seriousness far beyond her 8 years. Her thin voice barely rose above the rain. "I just drew what he showed me." Calder's jaw flexed. "The dog from last night?" Ivy nodded once. "The hurt one." Officer Lorne Brecker approached quietly from behind, boots squelching in a shallow puddle. Water streamed from the edges of his hood, and the dim amber light above made his rough features seem older than usual. "Calder," he murmured, "you might want to look at this from the top." Calder stood, circling the map slowly. The chalk marks, some bright, some smudged by the drizzle, were not childish at all. In fact, the longer he looked, the faster his pulse climbed. Arrows lined at exact 5-degree offsets, red dots arranged in precise triad clusters, a curved blue path that mirrored scent direction curves used in advanced maritime K9 tracking, and at the center, marked in a bold pink square, an origin point, a common K9 signal for last known contact. Ivy watched him with anxious eyes. "Is it bad?" The question trembled in her voice. Calder didn't answer immediately. His mind raced through the training manuals, through old operation sheets, through Bracken's last data logs before Pier 5 collapsed. He felt Rook brush against his knee, the young shepherd leaning close, sensing the spiral of memory threatening to break Calder's composure. "It isn't bad," Calder finally said, "but it's important." A new voice approached, crisp and feminine, cutting through the rain. "Sergeant Wynne, what's going on here?" Calder turned as Supervisor Dana Rydell stepped through a cluster of bystanders. She was a tall woman in her early 40s with straight coal-black hair pinned tightly at the nape of her neck. Her navy overcoat clung to her athletic frame, and her sharp gray eyes that missed nothing, were framed by faint tension lines earned from too many double shifts and a career defined by impossible decisions. Dana Rydell had once been a sworn officer, but after an accident 5 years earlier, when a smuggler's truck sideswiped her patrol car and shattered her left knee, she'd shifted into administrative command. Her limp was subtle but permanent. The steel cane she carried was slender, matte black, and handled with silent dignity. She wasn't unkind, just fiercely guarded, the type who had learned to bury her emotions before they buried her. Calder straightened. "Supervisor." Rydell eyed the flock of K9s, the child, the chalk-stained map. "Why are your dogs forming a perimeter around a little girl?" Lorne cleared his throat. "They're not guarding her, ma'am. They're reacting to the drawing." Dana lifted an eyebrow, skepticism clear. "You're telling me 6 federally trained K9s are responding to chalk art?" Calder motioned her closer. She approached reluctantly, her cane tapping the concrete, and stared down at the messy patchwork of symbols. Her expression shifted almost instantly. This is a run pattern." Calder nodded grimly. "It's more than that. It resembles a full sweep cycle." Donna crouched, the effort tight on her injured knee. She traced the air above a line of blue chalk, but did not touch the map. Where did she learn this? Ivy's small voice. "The dog showed me." Dana blinked, her usually guarded composure faltering. "What dog?" "A German shepherd," Ivy said. "Black collar, hurt leg, he was limping. He came out of the rain at Pier 7 last night." Dana looked sharply at Calder. "Pier 7 is sealed." Calder's tone turned rigid. "Exactly!" The girl swallowed hard. The memory seemed to weigh on her tiny shoulders. "He didn't bark, he didn't bite, he just looked at me. Then he scratched the floor like this." She knelt and mimicked the movements, drawing invisible shapes on the concrete with fragile, trembling fingers. Rook lowered his head, whined softly, and mirrored her motions with one paw. Dana inhaled sharply. "What the hell?" Ivy continued. "He made some of the shapes, and I remembered the rest. I didn't want to forget him." The rain thickened, rolling off the terminal roof like sheets of melted glass. Someone in the crowd whispered nervously. Calder took a slow breath. "Donna, look at the curve on the right." She followed his gaze. Recognition flashed across her face, horror threading its way into her voice. "That's Bracken's signature arc." Calder stiffened. Rook pressed closer, sensing the storm brewing inside him. Dana's throat tightened. "Sergeant Wynne." This girl recreated a tactical sweep pattern used only by your missing K9. Ivy bit her lip. He was sad. Really sad. He kept showing me the blue part over and over. Calder knelt before her gently. The blue line, did he seem scared? Ivy nodded, curling the chalk between her palms. Like he wanted someone to follow it, like he didn't want to be alone anymore. Dana looked at Calder, and for the first time in months, he saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of danger, but fear of hope. Hope so fragile it could break them if they reached for it carelessly. Calder, if this is real... We're going back to Pier 7, he said. Tonight. Dana hesitated, internal war reflected in her eyes. She was bound by protocols, restricted by responsibility, but she also knew Bracken had been Calder's entire heartbeat on duty, and maybe, just maybe, some small part of her wanted a miracle too. You have 30 minutes, she finally murmured, but if this turns into a false alarm, it won't. Ivy's eyes shone with a mix of guilt and relief. She wasn't just a witness, she felt responsible somehow, as though carrying the last words of a ghost no one else could hear. Calder placed a hand on Ivy's shoulder, gentle, careful. You did the right thing coming here. But what if I remembered wrong? Ivy whispered. What if I messed up the shapes? Calder shook his head. Dogs don't lie, Ivy, and mine haven't taken their eyes off this map since we arrived. Rook nudged the girl's elbow with his nose, tail tucked but earnest, an affirmation only a dog could give. Calder exhaled slowly, the rain easing just enough for him to see Ivy clearly, this trembling child who somehow held the missing pieces of his partner's last moments. We follow the map, he said at last. All of it. Ivy lowered her gaze, voice barely audible. Then, you'll find him. Calder didn't answer out loud, but deep inside, beneath the guilt and grief, something flickered, something that hurt as much as it healed. Hope. Evening settled over Greystone Pier, like a bruise spreading under the skin, heavy, darkening, and edged with the sting of rain that now fell in heavy diagonal sheets across the harbor. The storm clouds hung low enough to scrape the cranes, and the sodium floodlights along the docks flickered with the threat of imminent blackout. The terminal, usually a restless corridor of commuters and ferry workers, felt strangely suspended between panic and curiosity. Rumors traveled faster than the weather. Police dogs surrounding a child, a map on the ground, something wrong at Pier 7. By the time Calder Wynn finished speaking with Dana Rydell, dozens of passengers were pressing against the yellow stanchions, phones raised, their whispers rising in synchronized waves. The security staff struggled to keep them back, forming an uncoordinated patchwork of neon vests and anxious warnings. Calder ignored them all. His focus narrowed to the pack of German shepherds at his feet, each dog vibrating with an instinct that defied easy explanation. Rook stood at the front, his fur slick with rain, ears pricked toward the glass wall that separated the terminal from the open view of Pier 7. The young dog's muscles trembled, not with fear but with anticipation, the kind seen in K9 seconds before engaging in work that truly mattered. Officer Lorne Brecker, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of his wet jacket, moved to Calder's side. They're all wired up, he muttered. Haven't seen this kind of alignment since that chemical spill 3 years ago. Calder nodded. His face was harder, more angular under the harsh floodlights, and the stubble on his jaw darkened with the rain that kept sliding down. They smell something, he said. Maybe not scent, maybe memory. Whatever it is, it's pulling all of them toward the same place. Behind him, Ivy Merritt hugged her arms inside her raincoat, shrinking again into the folds of yellow fabric. The child looked even smaller now that the crowd had grown, her thin shoulders rising in tight little hitches, each time a stranger whispered too loudly. Her hazel eyes kept darting between Calder and the glass wall, as if she too felt a pull toward the sealed pier. Calder crouched and spoke gently. "Ivy, I need you to tell me something. When the dog showed you those signs, did he seem like he was running from something, or toward it?" Ivy shook her head, her curls bouncing with rainwater. "Neither," she whispered. "It felt like he wanted someone to find the place he couldn't leave." Her fingers twisted nervously around a wet piece of chalk still in her hand. It was blue, Bracken's color. Calder swallowed hard, and he forced himself to look away before emotion broke through his controlled mask. A new voice cut in, sharp and irritated. "Sergeant Wynne, what exactly are you doing?" Calder turned to see Officer Reed Halverson striding toward them. Reed was a man in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with buzzed blonde hair and a perfectly trimmed beard that added severity to his already stern features. His skin carried the rough pinkness of someone who worked outdoors more than he slept, and his icy blue eyes flicked from the canines to Calder with simmering frustration. Reed's personality was shaped by years of being overlooked for promotions, his ambition sharpened by disappointment, his temper quick to ignite when he perceived someone skipping protocols. He wasn't a bad officer, but he was brittle, defensive, and obsessed with procedure. "You can't take a civilian child's drawing seriously," Reed continued, his tone clipped. "This isn't how police operations work." Calder straightened. "We're not in the middle of a standard operation." Reed scoffed, rain dripping from his jaw. "So what? You believe the ghost of your missing dog is sending messages through an 8-year-old? Lorne bristled. "Watch yourself, Reed." "I'm just saying it," Reed shot back. "Someone has to. The whole damn terminal is filming us, and we're standing around debating crayon scribbles." His gaze cut sharply toward Ivy. "We're letting a child dictate our next steps." Calder stepped between Reed and the girl, shoulders squared. She didn't draw random scribbles. She reproduced a restricted K9 sweep pattern that only trained dogs use in advanced operations, and the dogs, every single one, recognized it immediately. Reed rolled his jaw, frustration bleeding into doubt. His stance faltered for a fraction of a second. Supervisor Dana Rydell, leaning slightly on her cane, moved closer. "Reed, stand down. Sergeant Wynne has operational control of this team." Reed exhaled sharply through his nose, but said nothing more. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Just then, another figure hurried toward them, a woman in her late 30s with soaked dark hair and tired eyes rimmed red from crying. She wore a maintenance uniform, the reflective striping faint under the dim lighting. This was Marla Merritt, Ivy's mother. Her appearance was disheveled, her round face pale beneath the cold rain, and worry clung to her like the damp fabric of her uniform. She had the look of someone used to working long overnight shifts. Slumped posture, worn-down hands, half-moons of exhaustion beneath her eyes. But beneath that was a fierce protectiveness that flared the moment she saw her daughter. "Ivy," she cried, pushing past an officer. "Baby, what's going on?" She kneeled beside the girl, cupping Ivy's face with trembling hands. "Are you hurt? Why are all these people around you?" Ivy leaned into her mother's arms, burying her face briefly against Marla's shoulder before whispering, "Mom, the dog from last night. I think he needs help." Marla stiffened. Her breath hitched, and when she looked up at the officers, fear flickered across her. Expression, not fear of them, but of what Ivy might have seen. "Ivy," she murmured carefully, "we talked about this. There are no dogs allowed in Pier 7. It's sealed. It's dangerous. You must have—" Calder raised a hand gently. "Mrs. Merritt, your daughter described in detail a dog from our unit, one that went missing weeks ago." Marla's eyes widened, panic cracking through her composure. No, she couldn't have. That pier is closed. She shouldn't have been anywhere near." Her voice broke. She swallowed hard, guilt flooding her features. "You went in there?" she whispered to Ivy. The girl nodded slowly, rain tracing the shape of her eyelashes. "I didn't mean to. He looked hurt. He wanted me to remember the shapes." Behind them, Rook let out a low whine and pawed once at the floor, a soft but deliberate motion pointing unmistakably toward the dark silhouette of Pier 7 through the stormy glass. Dana tapped her cane once against the ground, the quiet click cutting through the noise. "Sergeant Wynne, are you certain this isn't a coincidence?" Calder met her gaze. "Look at the dogs, Dana. They're making the decision for us." The canines had all lowered themselves slightly, bodies tense, breath steady, their collective focus aligned on the direction Bracken had disappeared weeks before. 1 heartbeat, then 4. Calder inhaled sharply, tasting metal and salt on his tongue. "We're opening Pier 7, he said, "right now." The decision struck the crowd like a shockwave. Several people gasped. Reed muttered a curse. Marla held Ivy closer, torn between fear and desperate understanding. But Calder looked only at the storm-darkened pier outside, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something stir beneath the grief. Not certainty, but the possibility that Bracken was still out there, still fighting for someone to hear him. Night arrived not as a simple absence of day, but as a force, rolling in from the ocean with heavy rain and a punishing wind that drummed against the rusted metal bones of Greystone Pier. The storm turned every light into a trembling halo and every shadow into something alive. It was the kind of night meant to keep men inside, to keep dogs trembling under shelter. But Calder Wynne and his unit walked straight into it. The sealed barricade around Pier 7 loomed ahead, warning tape whipping in the wind like shredded flags. Calder moved first, lifting the plastic barrier with sure, decisive hands. He was soaked to the bone. Rain flattened his hair, turned his jacket darker, sharpened the edges of his face until he looked more carved than living. Yet a fierce clarity burned in his eyes. This was no longer protocol. This was instinct, loyalty, a need deeper than reason. Rook padded beside him, the rain streaming down his sable and black fur in dark rivulets. The young shepherd walked with lowered head, ears angled forward, every step precise. There was a gravity in his movements, a maturity beyond his 2 years. Once playful, now sharpened by Bracken's disappearance, Rook had become Calder's mirror, quiet, searching, refusing to give up. The other dogs followed, 6 silent phantoms slicing through the storm, their handlers tense behind them. Lorne Brecker trudged on Calder's right, his breath visible in the cold air. Rain plastered his sandy hair to his forehead, and water dripped from the jagged scar along his left forearm. He said nothing, but his presence was steady, a hulking anchor in the violent wind. Lorne's silence was never empty. It was protective, a promise that he would stand between his team and anything waiting in the dark. Behind him, Officer Reed Halverson marched with visible irritation. The rain had turned his short blonde hair into spiky clumps, and the hood of his jacket sagged uselessly behind him. Reed's jaw clenched as he walked, the glowing pier lights reflecting off his wet beard. Doubt gnawed at him, but so did something else. Fear that if Bracken truly lived, Reed's refusal to search earlier would mark him as a coward. He trailed behind Rook with a mixture of resentment and reluctant belief. Supervisor Dana Rydell followed as far as the barricade, leaning heavily on her cane. Rain streaked her cheeks, though she pretended it was only the weather. She could not march with them, not with her ruined knee, but her voice cut through the storm with authority. "Calder, bring them back, all of them." Calder only nodded before disappearing into the dark of the sealed pier. Inside the abandoned grain warehouse, the storm's ferocity changed. Rain hammered the metal roof overhead in uneven rhythms, creating a battlefield of echoing vibrations. The air was thick with damp wood, old grain dust, and the metallic tang of rust. The broken ceiling beams cast fractured shadows across the floor, and every steady drip of water from the pipes above felt like a countdown. The K9 team fanned out, flashlights slicing through the dimness. Rook's nose twitched, his tail stiffened. He surged forward, pulling Calder toward a narrow corridor that branched off from the main storage hall. just as Ivy's swirling blue line had indicated. Calder's heart struck against his ribs. Please, Bracken, be here. The corridor was cramped, lined with corroded metal panels and scattered debris from the collapse weeks earlier. The beam of Lorne's flashlight swept across a patch of cement, and there it was, a set of scratch marks, long, desperate, not random. Calder, Lorne breathed. These are fresh, maybe a few days old at most. Rook sniffed the scratches, then lifted his head and gave a trembling whine. He moved forward again, this time faster, claws clicking sharply on the cement. The rest of the dogs followed with rising tension, hackles raised, bodies rigid, tails lowered but alert. Reed ran a hand down his damp beard. This is impossible. No dog survives alone this long down here. Calder didn't bother responding. Hope was louder than Reed's skepticism. Further down the corridor, they found a strip of black nylon caught on a jagged metal corner. Calder knelt, fingers brushing over it with shaking restraint. It was a torn piece of a tactical K9 collar, black industrial grade, scratched at the edges by something stronger than mere wear. Bracken's collar. Rain hammered the roof harder, as if urging them onward. Rook stiffened, pulled again, and this time he dragged Calder nearly off balance. The dog's muscles rippled beneath wet fur as he halted, before a low steel panel near the floor, old, rust-crusted, barely the width of a maintenance crawlspace, yet it hummed faintly in the storm's rhythm as though something behind it stirred. Rook growled, a deep, throaty sound that Calder had only heard during extreme alerts. The other shepherds echoed with low rumbles, forming a tense semicircle in front of the panel. "What's behind there?" Reed muttered. Calder's flashlight grazed the seams of the door. It wasn't part of any standard blueprint, he remembered. The entrance looked makeshift, as though welded in as an afterthought decades ago. Calder reached out, pressed his palm to the cold metal. Something vibrated faintly beneath it, a shift of movement, or perhaps a breath. Lorne tested the handle. It stuck, maybe welded shut. "No," Calder whispered, "not welded." He found the edge, dug his fingers under the corroded lip, and pulled. The panel screamed as it scraped open, metal grinding against metal, loud enough to send shocked birds fluttering from the rafters above. A blast of cold, stale air rushed out, air untouched by daylight for weeks. The dogs lunged forward, bodies rigid, ears pinned. Reed stumbled back. "Christ, what is that smell?" Calder didn't wait. He crouched, lowering himself to peer into the crawl space. His breath caught in his throat. Inside, the space narrowed into darkness. Tangled pipes, debris, but near the center a faint glimmer reflected off something. Golden fur. A shape curled tightly, shivering. A German shepherd. Calder's voice broke in his chest. "Bracken!" The dog's body twitched at the sound, a weak attempt to lift his head. His fur was matted with dirt and grime, ribs visible beneath the gaunt frame. One hind leg lay twisted unnaturally, swollen and bruised from an old injury that had never healed. The tactical collar, torn, hung loose around his neck. Bracken blinked once, eyelids heavy, then let out a faint, broken whine. Rook barked sharply, tail stiff with emotion. Calder shoved his flashlight into Reed's hands and crawled into the dark. "I've got you," he whispered, voice shaking as he reached Bracken's muzzle. "You held on, you waited." Bracken nudged Calder's wrist with a weak, trembling nose. Recognition, relief, apology, and love in a single gesture. Behind him, the storm roared as though the entire pier breathed out in disbelief. Calder gathered Bracken into his arms as much as the cramped space allowed, whispering promises through a tight throat. "We're here now. You're going home." The storm finally began to loosen its grip on Greystone Pier, though rain still slid from the broken gutters in cold silver ribbons. The warehouse seemed to breathe with the rescuers. Every drip, every hollow echo of wind through bent metal beams, blending with the frantic thrum of hearts that had feared too long and hoped too little. Calder Wynn backed out of the crawl space slowly, his arms wrapped around the limp but living form of Bracken. The German shepherd's weight was less than Calder remembered. The dog's ribs pressed sharply beneath his mud-matted coat, and dried blood marked the fur around his injured hind leg. But Bracken's chest rose, shallow, trembling, real. That alone was enough to break the iron grip Calder had kept around his emotions for 3 long weeks. The tightness in his throat made it difficult to breathe, as though grief and relief collided inside him. Rook was the first to reach them. The young dog circled Calder and Bracken with frantic, whining loops, nose nudging Bracken's ear, tail trembling with a mixture of joy and shock. His golden eyes, usually bright and alert, now shimmered with something raw, confusion, relief, and the instinctive recognition that his mentor had been found alive. Officer Lorne Brecker moved closer, crouching beside Calder. Rain streaked down his weathered face, making it hard to tell where sweat ended and tears began. He pressed one broad, scarred hand to Bracken's side, feeling the faint rise and fall beneath his palm. "He fought like hell," Lorne muttered. "Bracken, you stubborn old boy." Reed Halverson stood a few steps back, his rigid posture betraying the storm inside him. The floodlights behind him cast a pale ring around his blonde hair, and his clenched jaw shifted as he swallowed. Reed was not a man accustomed to apologies. Years of feeling overlooked, replaced, overshadowed, had built walls around every vulnerable part of him. But now, watching Bracken alive, against the odds, against logic, he felt those walls crack. Guilt pooled in his chest. He should have believed sooner. I was wrong," he whispered, mostly to himself. 2 additional medics hurried toward them, Nora Delvecchio and Emmett Morrell, both part of the port's emergency response team. Nora, a woman in her mid-30s with short auburn hair tucked under a rain-soaked cap, knelt beside Bracken. She had the compact build of a marathon runner, strong but light-footed, with olive-toned skin and amber eyes sharp enough to cut through panic. Her voice was calm, smooth, shaped by years of coaxing wounded dockworkers to stay awake during emergency transports. "Pulse is faint, but it's steady," she said, her fingers pressing expertly beneath Bracken's jaw. Emmett Morrell, taller and heavier, with a thick brown beard and round glasses fogged by the rain, set down a portable medical kit. Emmett's hands were surprisingly gentle for a man with the build of a longshoreman. He had grown up rescuing strays behind his family's bait shop and never lost the softness that came with that. He adjusted his glasses and said, "We'll stabilize him enough for transport. Calder, keep him calm. He knows your voice." Calder leaned lower, whispering Bracken's name again and again. The dog's ear twitched each time. Small movements, barely visible, but enough. Outside the warehouse, the storm had eased into a tired drizzle. Flashing blue lights reflected off puddles as backup units from the harbor police rolled in, alerted by Dana Rydell. Dana arrived moments later, leaning heavily on her cane, but refusing to wait in the vehicle. The cold air reddened her cheeks, and moisture clung to her lashes. Her breath caught when she saw Bracken, but she forced her voice steady. "He's alive," she murmured. "Damn it, Calder, you did it." Calder shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "Ivy did." As if on cue, small, hurried footsteps sounded behind them. Ivy Merritt approached, holding tightly to her mother, Marla's, hand. The little girl's yellow raincoat clung to her like soggy paper, and her curls stuck in damp tendrils against her cheeks. She hesitated at the edge of the group, eyes wide as she looked at Bracken's frail form. Calder turned to her and lowered himself until their eyes aligned. He felt drained, exhausted to his bones, but he managed a tired, grateful smile. "You helped us find him," he said softly. "Without you, he would still be down there." Ivy's lips trembled. "Is he going to die?" Her voice cracked on the last word, shoulders curling inward as though bracing for the worst. Nora glanced over her shoulder. "He's holding on," she said gently, "and with the right care, he has a real chance." Rook stepped toward Ivy then, nudging her knee with his nose. The young shepherd's posture was soft, tail wagging slightly despite exhaustion. Ivy bent down with trembling fingers, brushing his wet fur. In that touch was a connection older than the day they'd met. Two creatures led by instinct, bound by something unseen. Marla Merritt watched with a mixture of guilt and awe. Her face, round and framed by damp strands of dark hair, bore the lines of a woman who had spent countless nights working thankless jobs. She tightened her grip on Ivy's hand before whispering to Calder, "I wasn't watching her close enough. I should have stopped her from wandering." Calder looked at her gently. "If you had, Bracken would never have been found." Her breath trembled. Tears mixed with rain. For the first time that night, the fear in her eyes softened into relief. As the medics wrapped Bracken in thermal cloth and prepared a stretcher, the K9 unit formed an instinctive arc around him, Rook in front, the older shepherds flanking, each lowering their heads in near silent acknowledgement. It was the same formation they had made around Ivy earlier. A gesture of recognition, respect, trust, word, had spread beyond the harbor gates. A few dock workers stood nearby, drenched and speechless, some with hands pressed to their mouths, others with fists resting on their chests. One of them, an older man named Jerry Holt, with steel-gray hair and the posture of someone who had lived his entire life lifting crates and weathering storms, stepped forward. His lined face softened as he whispered, "Never seen anything like this. That dog waited for you, officer." Calder nodded, throat tight. "Yeah," he murmured. "He did." The medics lifted Bracken carefully onto the stretcher. The dog's eyes fluttered open for a moment, just long enough to meet Calder's gaze. In that flicker was a message clearer than anything Ivy had drawn. "I tried. I held on. You came." As they carried Bracken toward the waiting vehicle, Ivy stepped forward again. The K9s shifted, parting slightly as if granting her a path. She reached out and touched the stretcher's edge with two small fingers. "You can go home now," she whispered. The dogs bowed their heads, not deeply, not theatrically, but with a quiet grace that felt almost ancient. Calder exhaled, rain finally easing into mist. Tonight, a child's intuition had solved what logic had dismissed. Tonight, trust, fragile, unfathomable, and unexplainable, had brought a lost dog home. Sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary storm, God sends us a reminder that miracles don't always arrive in bright light or thunderous revelation. Sometimes, they come on four tired paws through the courage of a frightened child, or in the quiet whisper of instinct we can't explain. Bracken survived where no one believed survival was possible. Ivy listened when adults looked away, and Calder followed a path that logic could not justify, but faith could. In our lives, too, we often walk through storms believing we are alone, believing no one hears our cries for help. Yet this story reminds us, God sees what we cannot. God sends help in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, His miracles look like a loyal dog refusing to give up. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and consider subscribing so you never miss another story of courage, loyalty, and the quiet grace God places in this world. May the Lord bless you, protect your home, strengthen your spirit, and walk beside you through every storm, seen and unseen. God bless you, and thank you for being here.